Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our Masterclass presented by Skyterra Embrace. We have our Executive Director Greg Ostler and our Program Director Emma Mooney presenting on why camp when there is a perfectly good bed available. Some housekeeping items. Feel free to send any questions in through the chat and I will make sure that we have some time to address them at the end. And we just thank you for your time. So with that, I will let Greg and Emma take it away.
Excellent, thank you. So excited to be here. My name is Greg Ostler. I'm Executive Director here at Skyterra Embrace. I'm social work and substance abuse clinician as well. Been doing this work for about 10 years, and for a good chunk of that, it's been engaged in wilderness, whether that's therapy outdoors or that truly is the wilderness therapy environment. I've truly come to love the experience of exposure to the elements and all that we are able to glean from being outside, and I'm super excited to talk more about it. Emma?
Yeah, and I'm Emma. I'm super excited also to be able to share a little bit today on the topic of why nature matters. I have had a lot of experience with the outdoors and honestly find it to be one of the most important factors of my own mental health. My experience in the outdoors started in experiential learning through agriculture, and then I moved into the field of wilderness therapy. And so combined, I have about 12 years of experience soaking up the sun. And so let's get started.
Okay, so first, a couple of pieces we want to hit. We want you to walk away with 3 different pieces. The first, I want you to walk away understanding why nature is important and why it matters. The next is identifying the barriers that prevent us from being outside and having that exposure. And third, what to do with the information we provide and how to take it home with you.
So before we begin, I want us to be able to take just a brief moment and close your eyes, reflect, whatever makes you most comfortable. And I want you just to think about and recall your favorite childhood place in nature. Where was it? How did you find it? And how you felt when you were there. And I want you to keep this memory in your mind because I want you to carry it with you throughout this presentation. All the feelings that it brings up, anytime something resonates with you, I want you to consider how it relates to that memory. And we're going to revisit it a few times, but first, I want to be able to talk on why nature does actually matter. So what we're learning is that dirt is actually super healthy. In every human gut, we have this microbiome, and it's a collection of good and bad bacteria. This microbiome is responsible for your immune health, your hormone regulation, food digestion, so much more. And so as we learn all of the information, it's been found that our human intestinal gut has about the same amount of microbes or good and bad bacteria as soil or dirt. And so a study conducted by the Institute of Soil Research studied specifically the benefits of soil to the gut. And what they wanted to see was if people who spent more time outside actually did have a more balanced gut health. And so that's exactly what they found. People who lived in those rural areas that had more exposure to being outdoors had that healthy gut that was not found in those who lived in urban areas with less access. And so by taking off our shoes and walking through the grass, or if you're not comfortable with taking those shoes off, just walking in the grass can actually help us to help our body be in a more regulated state. And further, there's this book and it's called Your Second Brain. And it explains really the relationship between your gut and your brain. And so what we're learning is that through the vagus nerve, our brains and our guts are able to communicate. And this communication is bidirectional, which means that your brain is talking to your gut and your gut is actually talking to your brain. And so you might have experienced this before. You've been super nervous emotionally. You have something coming up and you feel it in your gut. And so it works the same way when your microbiome is off. You can feel it in your mood. So you can be more depressed, you can be more anxious, you can be grumpy. And so getting outside and allowing that relationship between the ground and our bodies to really happen helps us to be healthier in both our emotional and our physical health.
Yeah, so there are some really cool pieces that I want to talk about next. So We've talked a little bit about the dirty side, getting your hands dirty, really experiencing that. I want to pull back just a little bit and talk about what it does to the brain. What happens within our brain as we're having the emotions, the depression, the anxiety, the fear, and then we step outside. And with that, keeping a very simple focus on it, slowing down and really removing distractions, getting rid of technology, getting rid of expectations, getting rid of really relationships in many ways, allows us to truly understand what the world has to give us, just so we can also understand what we have to give back to the world. So it's that reciprocity. It's the idea that there is more out there than we're actually able to experience. And I'm not experiencing it because I'm not outside. I'm not able to slow down. We have so much in life. We have our school, we have our work, we have our relationships, we have responsibilities, and life keeps going. And what we have to do is intentionally stop and slow down so that nature really can nurture creativity, allow us to really get back into the basics of who I am and what I'm doing. The next is hearing the voice inside. We all have that rhetoric. We all have that conversation with ourselves when we have those doubts, we have the depression. It's that voice that talks back to us. Sometimes they're really supportive answers, and other times they're really unsupportive answers. And what we've learned is that as we let that voice be heard and give it space, we can then have control over it. We can then have some type of intentions around moving forward with it rather than feeling stuck if we get in that rut. And then the last really cool thing that I'm really excited about as I've learned more about wilderness and reflected on my experience in the woods is really the biomimicry. Biomimicry is an idea that allows us to really connect with the world around us in a very different way, that allows us to adapt and transform and really figure out through the senses what the world has for me and what I have for the world. And so we think of some of those little pieces, like we talk about agriculture, we talk about giving back, we talk about recycling. These are all biomimicry because if I give back, the world gives back to me. If I can recycle, I keep it clean. If I can spend time outside, then I'm able to keep myself clean, and I want to experience more and more. And one of the really cool examples is our fingerprints. So think about our fingerprints. They're all unique. And then take it outside. Think about the rings of a tree. You get a cross section of that tree. They have rings. They all tell a story. They all have an experience. And with that, just the simple fact that our bodies do kind of resemble the outdoors already really allows us to slow down and take that step outside to become more familiar over time.
Yeah, so for 2 years, a North Carolina Outward Bound program took surveys from students to see what they felt they were learning while they were out in the wilderness and what they were really, truly taking away from that experience.
Can you speak a little louder, Emma?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Or are you a little bit far from the mic?
My voice is a lot softer than Greg's.
Okay.
For 2 years, a North Carolina Outward Bound program, they started taking surveys of their students to see what it was that they were taking away from their experience of being in the woods for a few weeks at a time. And what they found is that mental strength was the prominent tool that students were proud of and that they were really cultivating while they were out there in that experience. And so it makes us really take a look at how does being outdoors give us that mental strength, or that grit, as we like to call it, to do things in life and take that skill into other parts of what we're doing day to day. And so what we have found is that it doesn't allow them to focus on the things they can't control. Weather's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of all of the different elements that you can't control when you're outside. And so we can't really shy away from that change. We have to be able to adapt. And then understanding the benefit of a calculated risk. Being outside can really, honestly, it can humble you, and it really places an emphasis on preparation. And so you can't give up after your first failure. We teach our girls that it is okay to fail, and that's the only way we learn how to succeed and create healthier habits. And so you can't move forward without trying, and sometimes that means that you do have to fail. And then last, you can't expect immediate results. I don't know if you've ever went on a 10-mile hike, but it's not going to happen in 30 minutes. It's going to take time, and you're going to have to just take the steps one foot at a time. And it is really powerful to think about the fact that we can cultivate these skills that ultimately have the power to create a really successful life for ourselves simply by spending more time outside.
Yeah. So there's a lot of benefit. There's a lot of exposure. There's a lot of experience. And I think one thing that really, I don't know, maybe hasn't been identified as important as it should be is normalizing being outside, normalizing spending time in nature, normalizing that whether we don't control the weather or not, we can still have fun outside. And I remember growing up, my mom was always pushing me outside. If I was doing maybe anything inside, my mom said, go do it outside, whether that's reading or that's chores or that's playing. And then my mom, in order to incentivize a little bit, would say, hey, if you guys go weed the garden, if you guys go and mow the lawn, if you guys go up to grandma and grandpa's house and take care of their yard, then we can go ahead and have an experience this afternoon. And it was all about experience rather than a gift. It wasn't mom's going to give us this present because we're outside and we're following instructions. It's because you go outside, that is your gift, became the real moral of the story. You know, you being able to go outside and enjoying the sunshine or picking weeds in the rain, like it was a punishment in so many ways. And it built that grit, it built that resilience and that desire to really spend more time outside. I have 3 young children. And one of the big things that I've noticed that is that they don't spend time outside unless they're at home. When we're at home, they have technology, they have all the distractions, they know how to spend time doing things. What they need to learn how to do is spend time doing nothing. They need to learn how to be good at being outside and just being present. And they don't do a good job. Richard Louv, in his book, The Last Child in the Woods, identifies a couple of different studies that they've done that identify that as you spend more time outside and you expose environmental education to students, they excel in their critical thinking skills, their performance, their energy, their desire, their real, like the motivations are skyrocketed up in a direction that helps them really find their incentive, finds their purpose. And so with that, there's a lot of opportunity for us to just normalize the fact that it's okay to be dirty and it's okay to go outside. But I think we have to really understand that we're not getting outside enough already. And a lot of that's because of some obstacles that we're going to talk about in just a minute. And I think it's very true and very real that regardless of age, whether you're 8, 18, or 80, being outside is medicine. Nature is medicine is the key to that component.
So naturalistic intelligence. This is part of a larger multiple intelligence theory that's created by Howard Gardner. And it really recognizes that there are different kinds of intelligence. Gardner explains that by being aware of the different types allows us to strengthen our own abilities. And so naturalistic intelligence has a lot to do with recognizing your surroundings and adjusting or overcoming those barriers that we may receive in life. And so in people that excel in this type of intelligence, what you might see is a strong sense of attribute orientation. And this is really the ability to find common traits or commonalities among your environment. You're going to see categorization, which is just the recognition of different characteristics, whether that's in other human beings or different trees, plant identification, hierarchical reasoning. A more familiar term for this would be prioritization, being able to really rank your needs in order from most important to least. Schematic memory, which is the ability to internalize and recall information, and the natural orientation. And this is the skill of being able to orient oneself, identifying with living organisms in their environments. And so we really know that humans are able to never stop learning. We're always strengthening our skills and we're always finding new interests. And so this type of intelligence is best developed when spending time outdoors, because it is where we are stimulating those areas in our brain and ultimately helping to strengthen those core competencies. Working with these students who are still learning these skills, I have witnessed our students growing in their own abilities. So I take one student who on her first day, she couldn't pick up her foot and step over a root that she wasn't expecting to be in the pathway from a tree that was to the side. And so she had a plan A, and then we went to plan B and plan C, and it took us 30 minutes to walk around this route, but we were able to do it. And it came down to her not being able to trust her own body. And so what we were able to do was cultivate that skill while she was here. We spent more time outside, and we call it nature smart, we were able to help her to have a keen awareness of her environment and heighten that sensory perception, which led to her being able to make those minor adjustments and keep going. So by the time that she left, she was walking at sunset and taking those walks on her own without needing someone to be there with her, completely confident in her body to be able to do it. So now I want us to go back to that childhood memory that you thought of. Did any of what we said remember, oh my goodness, so sorry. Do you remember being more creative and connected to your body in that environment? And do you remember how you felt? So to lead us into the next part of this class, I want you to add to those feelings, and I want you to think about when you started to lose that. And I want you to lock this in your brain as we move forward so that we can talk about the barriers preventing outdoor experiences.
So we're going to talk about 5, I would say, very key barriers that I believe we all experience, whether we're 8, 18, or 80. Again, age, it doesn't really matter here, but it's some of those pieces that we find excuses for. And this list is much longer than 5. I think we could all find 30 or 40 in our own little perspective. But I want to highlight 5. And the first one we're going to highlight is time. Me being able to commit time being outside interferes with so much of my daily responsibility. If I am expected to be on the computer in a meeting, if I'm expected to be on the phone, if I'm expected to be present for something else, me being outside almost becomes more of a hindrance to me fulfilling that responsibility. And then I start having excuses as to why it didn't work. And then I step back and I say, oh, guess today wasn't the day to be outside. And it really does come down to the simplicity of prioritizing tasks versus needs, being able to have your scheduled structure and being able to commit to some of your routine being outside. I love taking phone calls outside. I love doing therapy outside. I love taking the group, rather than sitting around on the couch, taking them and sitting around the fire pit. We're still sitting, we're still engaging, but we get to experience such a different environment, and which changes perspectives. Changing that environment changes our capabilities in the long term. And I think that us being able to really address some of those clinical components of therapy, of life, of daily living, with a perspective that doesn't have the problem at the center of it, where we get to look off and we get to look at the trees, we get to look at birds, we get to hear birds, we get to engage our senses, really allows us to really take that step back and say, it's really not time that's getting in the way. It might really be me giving the time that it takes to be outside, because we do take time outside. We go to the car, we go to the store, we go to school, but that's not the same approach as being outside on purpose. This is as simple as spending 5 minutes drinking your coffee on your front steps, or rolling down your windows as you're driving. All of this counts as exposure. We're going to hit a couple more pieces at the end of this, but time being the first piece that I wanted to hit.
So that second piece that we're going to hit is technology. If you have an iPhone, you might receive the same notification, but it never fails at the end of the week. You're getting that you spent 1,000 hours of screen time this week. And it's kind of a subtle attack, but it's true. We do spend a lot of time on our phones. Whether it's social media or our emails, we're spending a ton of that time just sitting and scrolling. And so the most up-to-date statistic that we have is that the average American spends 7 hours and 11 minutes a day on their phone, which is bizarre. But it's not just entertainment. That's the problem, and it's not always been around, so it's not been an issue until now. Past social media and entertainment, the world is literally evolving into a society where going outside is not necessary. You know, there's a pandemic and we need to social distance. What do? Let's all work from home. You want some groceries? Well, now we have Amazon Prime and DoorDash for that. You like group exercises, but you don't like to leave your house? Let me introduce you to my good friend, the Peloton. And so we literally have created this environment where we don't have to go outside and experience nature for what it is.
Mm-hmm. A big factor that we're learning from that is, because everything is so absorbed in technology and the daily facets of life, a lot of people simply don't know how to find those green areas. those green spaces, whether it's a park or it's the sunshine. Like it sounds super cliche. And for me, I think it's hard to understand how my kids don't like being outside because I love it. But the reality is, if students have not had the exposure to be outside, they don't know what that experience is going to be like. They don't know what to expect. They don't know what's going to hurt them and what's going to help them. And so they also don't have the mindset to think, let me go find these activities. Let me go find the resources. Because there's a ton of apps. We use a ton of apps within our program even to guide us on hikes, to get us from one spot to another. And we used to call those maps, right? We used to have the paper maps that fold out all in front of the dashboard and block the window, and everyone's like, move it out of the way. Like, we know what that's like. Now it's so easy, yet we're not utilizing that as the resource because there's so much other stuff I can invest my time and energy into and stay inside, because outside's uncomfortable, outside's unknown. And so we're seeing that more and more students, as they really figure out what it feels like to be outside by exposing themselves to the elements and hiking and parks and in sports and games, that they're open to it, but they need a hand holding. They need a guide. They need a little bit of support, and then they start taking off. But it really is the reality that they don't know where those resources are, unfortunately. We've had students who have been from like New York City, Manhattan area, and we have such a park, yet they're so bogged down with all the other buildings and all the other environment, they don't think about going to the park to get time out. They go to Starbucks because they get to walk to the coffee shop, and so there's a lot of that piece where they think they're doing it, and what we know is they're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in 2006, they actually began cutting outdoor playtime for children in schools. And they really didn't stop reducing that time until around 2015. So this essentially means that we have an entire generation of students who are starting to run into adulthood that have had about half the amount of familiarity with the outdoors than generations before them. And so feeling knowledgeable about the outdoors is super vital for students to be motivated to go outside. So you add this to the fact that they don't have the resources and they're not educated. And what we have is kind of a really big problem. I've spent a lot of my time and career working on farms, and in 2017, I helped to open an educational farm, and we called it the Pizza Farm. And so it was set up, the plot was a circle, and it was divided into pizza slices. And so each slice had a little bit something different. So we had grains for the dough of pizza. We had pigs in a slice to represent pepperoni. We had greens and vegetables for toppings. And I'll never forget one of our first field trips. We had some fifth graders on the farm, and we were walking around and we asked the question, hey, does anyone know where hamburgers come from? And very confidently, this little boy raises his hand and he's like, yeah. And so he's like, McDonald's. And I was like, okay, so what about before that? Like, where does the hamburger come before it goes to McDonald's? And he's like, oh, raises his hand again, super confident. The grocery store. And so what we're realizing in that moment, or we were realizing in that moment, is that some of our students don't have even the basic education or understanding of where our resources come from, let alone enough knowledge to be able to prepare for a camping trip or an outdoor experience.
Mm-hmm. And the fifth one that we're going to hit, that I believe really ties them all together, is fear. If we look at the universal human needs, certainty is number one. I need certainty in everything I do. If I don't have certainty, I'm not safe. And we highlight safety in just about everything we do at Embrace, whether it's emotional safety, physical safety, spiritual safety, psychological safety. There's so much that we are learning as we have just come up from being kids to being adults to really figuring out in this profession what safety looks like. Safety does not always mean that that we're not being chased by a lion and that we have all our needs met. Safety really means three basic things. I am comfortable, I am in control, and this is a familiar experience for me. If any of those are out of line, students are offline. Students are disconnected. Students do not know how to take those steps forward until we normalize it. A lot of what we talk about is normalizing the experience and helping them to take that step into the unknown. The biggest piece that we've seen is that there's not necessarily resistance to it, but a lot of hesitation. a lot of self-doubt, a lot of lack of self-esteem, a lot of confidence is just out the window because I don't know what to do. And I don't want to look foolish. I don't want to not know what I'm doing. And I really don't want to be outside. So it's these components that all come together that start leading these young people, I'm going to say all like adults alike, leading them towards retreating back to their comfort zone, going back to what they know, what's familiar, what's safety. That's my house. That's my bed. That's my couch. That's my TV. That's my phone. And we're in an incredible part of the country where we don't really have cell reception around our campus, which is really convenient. And we have really spotty internet. And so like us being able to just normalize the fact that we don't need to connect all the time, and we are stepping outside, we are meeting outside, brings the students awareness to the fact that we can do it different. And we can really experience life in a different way that's not fear driven, but it's curious. It's curiosity driven. And it's this desire driven intention to be outside and learn something new. And then we start seeing those fears or reactions kind of dissipate. They start retreating. The downside of fear really takes a step back, and then curiosity steps up and says, hey, let's go try this. Let's do something new today.
So we're back to that childhood memory. And I really am curious if any of your reasons why you began to lose that piece of you aligned with any of the barriers that were identified in the presentation. And so one thing that I personally have been working on is asking myself, what would 8-year-old Emma do? Because I think 8-year-old Emma was really cool. She wanted to rock climb, and she wanted to be this professional ice skater, and she explored in the woods, and she could pick up these ginormous wolf spiders and take them to her mother, who was not as thrilled about the experience, but I was excited, and I was curious and brave. And I think that these are two really valuable traits that we can transition into our adult life. I look at our hiring process and consider the candidates that come in for interviews. We're asking questions like, are they humble? Are they hungry? Are they smart? Are they curious and flexible? And are they going to be willing to try new things? And so embracing that inner child and reaping all of the benefits that nature really does offer can be a very valuable life skill. And so to bring this full circle, now I ask you to reflect on the memory that you've been going back to throughout this webinar, and think about the differences between your relationship with the outdoors then versus what it might be now. Are they similar? Do they align? And finally, I want you to ask yourself, how can we honor that inner child? And how can we reconnect with nature in a way that really fits into our adult lives?
Yeah. So now that we've talked about why nature is important, we've talked about what's getting in the way. I want to talk about how to incorporate it. I'm going to talk about a couple. Emma's going to take one, but Andrea, I think this talks to some of your transferable skills as well. But how do we take this home? How do we engage nature as a family, as an individual, for children, for adults? And I'm going to identify a couple of very simple ways of creating inviting outdoor and indoor spaces. And the first I want to do is just say, open your windows and your doors. Let that breeze come in and let it fill your house. Let it fill that space you're in, and maybe turn down the heat or turn down the AC and let nature do its job. The next part is explore the woods. Be outside and be curious. Take that step out, maybe get a little bit dirty, but you have to take that step first. The next piece is patio spaces. Create a space at your home where you can spend time outside that does allow you to remain in that safety, right? That you're controlled, you're comfortable, you're familiar. That might be you taking your coffee outside. That might be you taking lunch outside. That might be you just being able to open that door and let that breeze come in while you're working. And then the third is houseplants. So my mom is an avid gardener. She always has been. I've always been kind of dragged into it, unfortunately, and I can't keep a plant alive. But what I've learned is that for those that can, there's a science to it. There's a magic to it. They're talking to their plants. They are feeling their plants. They are dancing with their plants, and they're allowing their plants to be part of their relationship that they have with themselves and nature, whether those are indoor or outdoor plants. My mom has a greenhouse. My wife is all into this. And I don't understand it, but she always says, you got to talk positive to your plants. If you talk positive, they will grow. And it works every time. And I don't get it. And she's like, Greg, what's wrong with this plant? And I was like, I don't know, have you talked to it today? And she like thinks I'm being all sarcastic, but I'm being real. And it's one of those pieces that we have to learn to have a relationship with nature. And that I think is the simplest way, because we essentially planted this plant or received this plant in a really pretty pot. The plant is important to us. If we make it important, that's where that prioritization comes in key.
Yeah. And so on top of that, I want to challenge you to reconnect with your childlike curiosity. Really do think about what your 8-year-old self would do. You know, it's kind of like the magic of Christmas. There's the magic of outdoors. And there's really something special about wondering and observing and just taking it all in. And so we can do that through being out there, taking a step outside. And then we can also do that through reflection when that's not as possible. So we can ask ourselves those questions like, what can you be curious about today? And how were you brave today? That's a question that we ask the girls every single day. It's something that they think about, and it's something that they use to set their intention for the next day, so that when they're in their morning huddle, they can decide how they're going to move forward and be that curious self. And then finally, what in nature excites you, and what can you participate in that will spark even more curiosity?
And the last piece that I'm going to hit here on this incorporating nature at home is the idea of finding something that fits you. So often we expect ourselves to fit into that box of nature. If I don't like hiking, I have to go and just kind of get used to it. And the reality is you don't have to start there. You can start at a very different place that engages you, your hobbies, your interests. That might be going out to dinner, drinking a glass of wine outside. That's the first step. The next step might be finding other people who are interested. Identify something that you want to try, going out and figuring out what the resources are and how to try that, and then give it a chance. Next is join a club. Find a community. Find a community of people, whether that's on social media or out in your neighborhood or in your local environment, that allows you to connect with like-minded people who also want outside. That's going to drive you to spending more time outside. The last part, start slow. Start where you're at, start what your needs are. Certainly don't jump on a 7-mile hike day one. You might take a walk around the neighborhood. You might take a walk out the front porch, and that might be where we need to start. But all of us are starting at a very different place, and that's very much okay. And I want to encourage you to allow that to be that safety that we hold on to as we jump into nature.
Awesome. Thank you. Is there any other questions that anyone has at this point?
There were a couple that I saw come in, and I want to hit the transferability of skills real quick, because I think it's really important that while we're working with young adults, a lot of these young adults have very childlike experiences, and I would say they're very naive. They don't know what it's like. And a phrase I use quite often is, you don't know what you don't know. And so I think that helping these students figure out what they don't know is step one. Step two is, what does that look like, and what does safety look like, and how do I maintain that kind of sense of self? And then the third is, let's go practice. Let's get outside. Let's put a plan in place that really allows them to build that confidence, but it has to be with someone that is confident. If we are both going outside and we're both terrified, it's probably not going to be the same intention. And I really think it is a lot more about exposure than it is about talking through the experience. I think if you can get outside and you can really hit just kind of the normalization of nature, you don't have to talk about how important the sun is. You can simply enjoy it yourself, and that will help that idea or intention kind of come to fruition a little bit more. Yeah,
I think being in a non-judgmental zone to show up as your authentic self and show up as someone who genuinely is trying something that's new is really powerful for specifically the Embrace girls, because they can try it and they can cultivate that skill, and also cultivate the skill of being okay at failing and not doing, they're not professionals the first time that they show up and try to do it. And so just getting comfortable with that feeling can be honestly one of the most powerful things that they can learn.
Jeanette just wrote, do you think some of the news about things like an increased tick population have made people stay out of the woods? I think the easy answer is yes. I think it goes right back to that fear. If we don't know what a tick is, we're certainly going to avoid it. If we know how to take care of tick bites and take care of ticks when they happen, then we're going to be curious to be able to get out there. The scary part is ticks carry disease and ticks carry really scary things. And I'm certainly not that doctor that's going to be able to talk about what that means. But what I do know is that if we are careful and we can observe, then we can take those precautions to be prepared to be outside. I think that's a bigger piece of that skill. It's not just going outside and jumping into it, but going with someone who knows and also being prepared. Having the necessary materials, supplies will create that safety for someone and allow them to really engage in that environment. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone said, hey, I'm not going outside because there's ticks. Just the same as I wouldn't be expected to say someone or hear someone say, I'm not going outside because it's a downpour. Like, there are environmental pieces that will deter me from engaging. And the goal of normalizing and exposing is that I can be outside even with ticks. I can be outside even with rain because I'm prepared, because I'm aware, and because I want to be outside. I think it's really important that, like, I've weeded the garden in the rain, and it's certainly not enjoyable. And I think I learned very valuable lessons around resilience and intentions. Like, I'm not going to do things that create opportunities for me to go into the garden and weed. You know, that might change my behaviors, but it's also not necessarily like the fear-based approach, but it's the experience-based. I learned the learned experience that we really can use to move forward.
I think that speaks really well to the transferable skills as well. Like, you know, our students are learning how to be prepared to be outside, just like they're learning how to be prepared with other life skills, other things. And so I think that speaks to the transferring, like, how does your preparation for a new experience affect the outcome for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? Well, we certainly thank you for taking the time and being so patient with us today as we navigated our technology issues. The next in our series of master classes will be on April 7th at noon Eastern time, and it is presented by our dietitian, Alyssa Patello, and that's how to escape the dieting hamster wheel and why the non-diet approach works. You can find this registration link on our website. Of course, this will be sent out to you as well. And if you know someone who is interested or could benefit from our program, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address and phone number is there. And again, we just thank you for your time, and it's been great having you on here with us.
Thank you.